joining us. No talking points memo this evening because I want to get right to our lead story, an interview with former Congressman Barney Frank. As you may know, the day after 3 were killed and more than 200 injured in that awful Boston terror attack last week, Mr. Frank became a center of controversy. While speaking on the phone to CNN, he put forth a political point of view.
In this terrible situation, let's be very grateful that we had a well-funded, functioning government. It is very fashionable in America, and has been for some time, to criticize government, to belittle public employees, talk about their pensions, to talk about what people think is their excessive health care. Here we saw government in 2 ways perform very well. I never was, as a member of Congress, one of the cheerleaders for less government, lower taxes. No tax cut would have helped us deal with this, or will help us recover. This is very expensive.
Now, after Mr. Frank said that, some journalists, including this one, thought his comments were too close to the death and destruction. Even the liberal MSNBC challenged Frank.
Sir, you keep talking about revenue and infrastructure and the fact that we have the capabilities necessary to respond to something as atrocious as this. Do you feel like you're capitalizing and making political hay of this event that happened?
Do I feel what? That I'm capitalizing?
Well, that you're making a political argument about revenue right now.
Yes, exactly.
Joining us now from Boston is Barney Frank. So in hindsight, do you think you should have waited a few days before making those points?
No, for 2 reasons. First, that's a partial quote of what I said. When I was called on that day, in every case, there were 3 or 4 interviews. I began by talking about how terrible it was, that some people were there with people they loved and all of a sudden they were dead. In every one of those interviews, I began, when they asked me my reaction, by talking about the sadness we all had to feel. Several of the interviewers then pressed me for further reactions. And I don't think a discussion of public policy is either inappropriate or premature. By the way, I do know that many others were talking about immigration. You and Dennis Miller were discussing my remarks a day or 2 later, and Mr. Miller was complaining, as I recall it, that President Obama hadn't called it terrorism on the first day. He waited to the second day. Well, that was an appropriate criticism given his viewpoint of the president. The notion that you suspend discussion of important issues in the face of a tragedy, I don't accept. Now, I did, as I said, begin all the interviews with my feelings of sadness and my condolences for the people who were involved.
Here's why it might be inappropriate. Because when you say that, look, no tax cut would help this situation, you basically polarizing Americans who want lower taxes, smaller government. But in a time like this, in Boston, and you're from Boston, I wanted to see, and I called for on the air, all Americans to come together, all right? Not only to support the grieving families, but also to show the world that we're a united front, and you're not going to come in here to our house and intimidate us. By your rhetoric, you're dividing people 24 hours after, when I think we should have all of us in the public eye, been trying to unite people.
I would have to ask you when that was, because I remember 2 days after listening to you and Mr. Miller be very critical of a range of things, including Mr. Miller, with you cheering him on, attacking President Obama for his response. No, I don't think it is.
No, we didn't attack President Obama for his response. We asked why.
Mr. Miller did.
We asked why the term Islamic jihad was enacted.
Yes, and Mr. Miller was very critical of the president for not having said terrorism on the first day and having said it on the second day.
That was all that is holding
Bill, wait a minute. Can I know the ground rules? Can I know the ground rules? Do I get to talk? Okay. Mr. Miller was being critical of the president. That was his right. As far as dividing the country is divided, as it should be in a democracy. Referring to existing divisions is not polarizing. I didn't know you were opposed to polarizing. I couldn't tell that from watching your show much of the time. But I think that's legitimate. As I said, yeah, it was appropriate to talk about the sympathy we felt and the horror. But when I was asked for further reactions, that was the reaction. And I do think that is a legitimate debate in America. And the other thing I would ask you is what you said, not the day after, 2 days after, 3 days after. When did it become appropriate? Because I heard many people from all parts of the spectrum being appropriately, not political in the sense of trying to win elections, but saying what they thought public policy ought to be much of that week.
All right, look. We have two positions. My position and what I call for on the night of the bombing was all Americans come together. And your position, 24 hours after, that you divided America on a policy basis. And people can decide what's worthy and what isn't. I know
no, Bill, I didn't divide America. I didn't divide America. America is appropriately divided. We are
You cast aspersions on those people who want smaller government and lower taxes.
Not on their people.
In a time when we all should have been uniting.
Oh, no, I did not cast aspersions on them the way you and Mr. Miller. The way. May I finish? Again, can I have a... I listened to you.
Come on.
Mr. Miller was...
You've had twice as much time as I've had so far. Go make your point.
May I speak? Mr. Miller was, in fact, being critical of the president. I didn't mention any individuals. I wasn't casting aspersions on people. I was expressing differences with their viewpoint. And I do not think that it is appropriate to say, gee, bad people who hate democracy did things. Let's not have a discussion of issues. It was not casting aspersions. It was not dividing people. It was referring to an existing debate in this country. And I have to ask you, when was it appropriate to start politics? Wednesday, not Tuesday?
I think you maybe aired it out by the end of the week, and then we had, of course,
the Mr. Miller, you were doing it on Wednesday.
All right. It's not even close to the same ballpark.
Mr. Miller was being very critical of the president. Mr. Miller, no, it's right at home plate. Mr. Miller was attacking the president for not saying terrorism on Wednesday.
Well, what do you think about that,
one of the best segments he ever did.
What do you think about that?
I think it was clearly terrorism. It was clearly terrorism.
Okay. Well, what do you think about the commander-in-chief not saying that it was the Islamic Jihad that was the motivating force behind the terror attack? He won't say it. What do you think about that?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, I think you were trying to, refer to a division of the country. That's a good thing to do. That's legitimate. On the Monday, when Mr. Miller was being critical of his comments on the Wednesday, nobody knew that it was Islamic terrorists. We knew it was terrorism, but nobody knew on the Monday. We didn't know who did it. So, no, I don't see how anyone.
But he hasn't still, the president still hasn't defined it as a jihadist action, still.
Well, I don't know about jihad. I would say, yes, these were Islamic, these were people inspired by Islamic terrorism. I think people, ought to be very clear about that. And I think that's
why do you think the president is, why do you think the president
I don't know,
is
Bill.
not
I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge of explaining the president, Bill.
Well, you're a thinker. You know him very well. He's the leader of your party. You must have an opinion on it. You have an opinion on everything else.
No, I don't have an opinion on everything else. I only have an opinion on things I know. And in fact, on the Monday, I said I had no idea when people asked me to speculate. One of the things I thought was unfortunate were a lot of people who used to be in the line of work I used to be in, speculating about things where they didn't know anything. I thought we should just defer to law enforcement.
We didn't like that at all, and speculation is never good. So you just don't know why Barack Obama won't say this was generated by Islamic Jihad? You're like me? Because I don't know. I mean, and I'm asking you, you might have more of an insight. Then you and I are together.
All right, no, you and I, neither one of us knows. I have not been in Washington. I've been out of Congress for some months. I've not been talking to his people about that. I do think it's legitimate for people to debate that one way or the other, but I don't think it's dividing the country to lose these debates. And I do think, by the way, that, look, Boston's got serious problems now. The level of funding we put into the police forces, the effects of a sequester, which we're seeing elsewhere, those are very legitimate topics of debate.
They are legitimate debate topics.
I don't think you are casting aspersions on people or dividing the country when you allude to existing legitimate public policy discussions after expressing sympathy. That's what I do.
All right, Congressman. I think that we both got our points across tonight, which is what we do on this program, and we're glad you participated. Thanks very much.